After the disaster at Bull Run, Washington trembled with fear. The Union Army had fled in panic, and Confederate banners seemed ready to appear on the hills outside the Capitol. Yet President Lincoln, calm though weary, looked not only to the battlefields of Virginia, but also to the waters that surrounded the young Confederacy. He understood that this war would not be won by armies alone. It would be fought on rivers, along coastlines, and across the open sea. In April of 1861, even before Bull Run, Lincoln had declared a blockade of the southern ports. To many, it seemed a bold but impossible order. The Confederacy stretched nearly 3,500 miles along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts, dotted with harbors: Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Mobile, Wilmington. How could the Union Navy, small and scattered, hope to seal them all? And yet Lincoln was firm. The South must be strangled, its trade cut off, its lifeblood of cotton and supplies severed. When I first traveled to Hampton Roads, Virginia, to witness the early blockade, the Union fleet looked unimpressive. Old wooden frigates and converted merchant ships lay at anchor, their decks bristling with cannon, but their hulls creaking with age. Sailors worked tirelessly to refit them, while officers fretted over charts and supply lists. The task seemed beyond human reach. Yet slowly, the blockade grew teeth. I boarded the USS Minnesota one summer morning and sailed along the Atlantic coast. From her deck I watched as Union ships took up positions outside Confederate harbors, dark silhouettes against the horizon. Day and night they waited, intercepting vessels that dared to run the blockade. Sometimes the chases were long and thrilling, with sails straining, cannon booming across the waves. More often it was a patient, grinding duty, hours of watching the sea, scanning for the faint outline of a ship against the sky. The blockade was not perfect. Fast, sleek steamers known as blockade runners darted from the Bahamas or Bermuda, slipping through under cover of darkness or storm. I saw one such vessel once, a narrow, gray-painted steamer, her funnels belching smoke as she cut through the waves. Union ships gave chase, their guns thundering, but she vanished into the mist like a phantom. These runners carried rifles, boots, and medicines into the South, and returned laden with cotton, white gold that fetched fortunes in Europe. Still, the pressure mounted. By the end of 1861, dozens of southern harbors lay effectively sealed. Cotton rotted on the docks, merchants despaired. The Confederacy, once proud of its ability to bring England to its knees with cotton, found its lifeline shrinking. I saw warehouses in Charleston stuffed with unsold bales, while poor families in the countryside struggled to buy salt, cloth, or medicine. The blockade was a slow weapon, but a deadly one. Yet the war at sea was not only about trade, it was about technology. In the winter of 1862, the world watched in awe as a revolution unfolded in Hampton Roads. I was there when the Confederate ironclad, the CSS Virginia, built from the burned hulk of the old USS Merrimac, steamed into the harbor. Her black iron plates glistened in the sun, her slanted sides deflecting cannon fire. She looked like no ship I had ever seen, more fortress than vessel. On March 8, 1862, she struck. I watched from the shore as she descended upon the wooden Union fleet like a wolf among sheep. The USS Cumberland was rammed and sent to the bottom, her sailors leaping into the water as she sank with her flag still flying. The USS Congress burned until her magazine exploded, lighting the sky with fire. The Union Navy reeled in horror, centuries of wooden warships rendered obsolete in a single day. But the next morning, salvation came in the form of a strange little vessel, the USS Monitor. She was small, squat, her deck barely above the waves, with a single revolving turret that looked like a floating cheese box. Crowds gathered along the shore as she steamed out to meet the Virginia. What followed was like nothing the world had ever witnessed. Iron against iron, shot and shell, clanging harmlessly off steel armor, the two ships circling, firing, retreating, advancing again. The roar echoed across the harbor for hours. I scribbled furiously in my notebook, knowing I was watching history. The death of the wooden navy, the birth of the modern age of iron and steam. Neither ship could claim victory that day. The Virginia limped back to port. The Monitor held her ground. Yet in that clash, the future of naval warfare was decided. Nations across the world would rush to build ironclads, and the seas would never be the same. For the Confederacy, the blockade grew ever tighter. Ports like New Orleans fell under Union control, their mighty trade silenced. On the Mississippi River, Union gunboats pressed southward, cutting the Confederacy in two. I traveled by steamer along that great river and saw the power of the gunboats firsthand, their armored sides bristling with cannon, their decks alive with sailors. Towns that had once thrived on river trade now watched in fear as Union flags appeared on the horizon. The blockade was slow, grinding, invisible to those who looked only for battles of glory. But I knew, as I spoke with planters in despair and merchants in ruin, that it was one of Lincoln's sharpest weapons. No cannon shot could wound so deeply as hunger, poverty, and isolation. The Union Navy, patient and relentless, was choking the South. As I wrote my dispatches by lantern light aboard a Union vessel, I reflected on what I had seen. The war at sea was not the war of gallant charges or waving flags. It was a war of endurance, of steel and steam, of long nights staring into dark horizons. It was a war that would decide not only the fate of the Confederacy, but the future of navies around the world. I ended my notes that night with these words: "The blockade is not thunder, but suffocation. It strangles slowly, invisibly, until the victim cannot breathe. And in that silence lies the death of the Confederacy."